Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Giorgio Askew. I'm the marketing coordinator with Greenfield Belser, which is a Fem Partners company. Today, we're presenting on how Schwabe reorganized from practice areas to industries and live to tell about it. Presented by Berkey Belser, Denise Gaskin, Doug Johnson. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentations, please type them into the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. I'll bring them up during the presentation, and we'll also have time for questions at the end. Now, without further ado, we will turn the webinar over to Doug Johnson, who will introduce the panelists.
Hey, Giorgio, thanks very much. It's great to be speaking with everybody today, and just take a moment to kind of set the stage and let you know who else is going to be speaking today. I'm obviously Doug Johnson. I'm the managing partner of Catapult Growth Partners. Also joining me today is Denise Gaskin, who is the chief operating officer of Schwabe, and Berkey Belser, who's the creative director of Greenfield Belser. Most of you guys on the call know him. He's very well known in professional services for his body of work over a lifetime, particularly when it comes to branding and brand communications for law firms. So with that, let's go ahead and kind of jump into this case study and how we collaborated together. Just giving you a sense of what we're going to cover today. The three of us collaborated on Schwabe's rebranding and strategy development back in 2015. So we're going to talk a little bit about where the firm was back then, kind of where it wanted to go and where it is today. I'll be talking about how we approached the strategic thinking process and then worked hand in hand with Denise and Berkey in terms of the branding and turning that strategy into reality. And then we're going to kind of end it up with Denise talking about some of the challenges that she faced going through this process, and then also what the next stages of the iteration of this is. It's not a one-time situation. There's a lot of implementation. There's sort of ongoing execution, and as Denise will talk about, they feel like they're sort of in version 2.0 of this process. But with that, we'll kind of move into the presentation in terms of where the firm was and what they were trying to accomplish back several years ago. Denise, let me turn it over to you at this point.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So back in 2015, we found ourselves a 25-year-old law firm, 125-year-old law firm with about 165 lawyers, offices primarily in Oregon and in Washington State. We were faced with a leadership transition. Our co-managing partners had been in their leadership role for about 16 years, and were asking for the firm to actually choose some new leaders. So we had been having lots of meetings with shareholders around what that looks like, and then what happened out of those meetings was our shareholders said, we really need to know who we are as a firm and what we want to become, and we need to do that first. So we need a strategic plan before we can select who would then be the best person to get us there. So we kind of halted our leadership transition conversation and instead backed up and went to a strategic planning conversation. And so what we're going to present today is the results of that conversation that then led to us selecting a new leader. So the other background for where we were is had been pretty flat, no growth for many years. We had seen some declining lawyer headcount. We felt like we were losing some market share, or at least not gaining any significant market share. And we were losing laterals to other opportunities, in particular, seeing some of our lawyers migrate to in-house positions. So we had a lot of shareholder meetings talking about what do we do to sort of turn this tide for us? So what we sought to do was, first of all, really define who are we? Who are we now? We're probably something different than we were back when the firm was first founded. What do we care about? What do we want to be? And then, of course, the most important question is how can you get there? And so we went about this with Doug Johnson's help and Berkey Belser's help with asking a lot of questions, holding a lot of meetings, and doing some online question and answer. So lots of process, and went through a formal strategic planning process and rebrand. And so, Doug, I think I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, what was interesting about this project is we do a lot of work with law firms around strategy, and oftentimes we see the approach where a firm will try to develop strategy on their own, sort of in a vacuum, and it tends to be an inside perspective looking out without a lot of market feedback. And what was really beneficial, I think, in this whole thing, and some of it was just serendipity that it played out this way, is that we had a very engaged, the co-managing partners were very engaged in this process. We had, a very astute and engaged COO and Denise working hand in hand with us. And also they had made the decision to rebrand the firm at the same time and work with Berkey's firm, Greenfield Belzer. And those of you who have worked with Berkey know that they're far more than just a branding firm. I mean, they do a lot of research. They know the marketplace, and they also approach branding from a very strategic perspective in terms of it's not just a veneer that we're putting up on a website. It's really how do we take the strategy and articulate that on the marketplace. And so we just had this good fortune of all working together in sort of a synergistic way. And to me, it's become sort of the best practice for firms that are looking at strategy and how to really make it effective and then actually implement it. Because that's the other challenge oftentimes with law firm strategy is, you come up with a decent strategy and then it just sits on a shelf, or you don't have the full consensus and there's a lot of disagreement as to the strategy and how to implement that. And Berkey, if you just kind of move forward a few slides to some of my slides on strategy, I'll just give you a quick overview of how we tackle strategy and look at it. And I think the other thing that's important is that, in this case, Schwabe made a very bold decision to move away from sort of a traditional, service line practice area strategy to an industry group. And there's always a lot of fear and trepidation in that because, as we often say, the mark of a good strategy is it requires tough choices and trade-offs, and you have to say no to a lot of things. Otherwise, it isn't a very effective strategy. But what we oftentimes see is, there's pressures that we're all aware of what's going on in the legal industry, or any business for that matter. And change comes about when you have either internal pressures or external. And so the green boxes there are sort of the internal changes that we're pressing on a firm, where you say as a firm, hey, we have some aspirational changes. In Schwabe's case, it was that and their weakness, saying, look, we want to move up a little bit. We've been kind of weak and flat in the marketplace, so we have some internal pressure that we want to change things. But quite honestly, it's often hard to get any firm to make a change if it's just coming from an internal point of view. Usually where the real change comes is when you have outside pressure, and that's happening to everybody, where you've got competitors that are either entering a market or doing things differently, or more importantly, you've got clients now that are saying, we want you to know our industry better. We want our law firms to approach the work in a different fashion. So I think Schwabe was feeling all four of these pressures, both internally and externally, to make some bold decisions. So then when we look at strategy, we always sort of look at, well, what does strategy impact? I think a lot of people oftentimes think strategy is just about, how do we get new clients in the door? But we look at it and say, look, you've got obviously that whole thing about prospects. How do you create a value proposition to attract and win new clients? But we can't forget that there's an internal constituency, and that's your talent that you already have. How does your strategy impact the retention of the lawyers you have in the firm and keep the good lawyers there without having them go to another firm, given all the competitive pressure for lateral recruiting? Then oftentimes we sort of forget about the lifeblood of our firm is our existing clients. Is this strategy and the value proposition we're putting together really meaningful for them, and is it going to help us retain and grow those clients? 80% of our revenue is probably coming from that existing client base. So, while it's exciting to think about a strategy that brings in new clients, we can't forget what keeps the lights on. And then the final part that we often look at is is this strategy also going to articulate a unique value proposition in the marketplace that helps a firm bring in laterals? And I think in all four of these cases, Schwabe sort of experienced benefits in all these areas in terms of the strategy they implemented. And then just really quickly, I mean, strategy sometimes gets overblown in terms of, how complicated it is, or it's over-engineered. But quite honestly, it's really sort of understanding what your current situation is and being very honest and sort of with brutal candor about where you really are. And I think Schwabe was very realistic. They didn't pull punches. They sort of said, here's where we are. We haven't grown for a while. We really have this idea of where we could be. We've got a great platform and great reputation. So we clearly articulate what the desired future state would be in the next 3 to 5 years. And then the harder part is saying, okay, if that's where you want to be, what do we have to do to get there? And that's really where our strategy process comes into play, where we look at a number of factors. One, we spent a fair amount of time both Berkey and my organization did this, as well as looking at the market and really understanding how did the market perceive Schwabe, what did clients say about them, what did prospective clients, what did former clients, and we did a lot of market research to really have a clear understanding of the market perception from the outside looking in. Then obviously we had to spend a fair amount of time understanding the firm, its culture, its perspective, what it wanted to accomplish. And Schwabe is a very collaborative firm. They really do enjoy having fun, which is very true. And we found that in this process, it did expand beyond the initial scope in that it became incredibly collaborative down to the point where the firm really wanted to talk to all the support staff, and everybody across the board, from partners to associates to the sports team and all that, to get a lot of feedback in terms of where the firm wanted to go, which I think also served us very well. Is when we put forth a pretty radical change in strategy, we had pretty much unanimous consensus. People felt they had their voice heard. And I think when people have that occur, they're much more willing to go along with something that's a change. I mean, I think we're always fearful of change, and there's always a good reason that change sometimes can blow up with you. So you have to really use this strategy process to build consensus, particularly in a law firm, to get buy-in and to allow you then to move into that execution phase. So that's really what we did. We spent a long time in the external, internal, worked with Berkey and his team, came up with a strategy formulation in terms of what does the firm want to do, and their decision was very clear. We want to be the go-to firm in the Pacific Northwest in a handful of industries that represent the growth for this area that we have the right to win in. And that was sort of the strategy process. And while that was a fairly complex and involved process, that really is just the starting point for the heavy lifting that Berkey had to do to rebrand the firm, and then of course that Denise has had to carry for the next 2 or 3 years in terms of actually executing on it. But we feel if you take this approach with a thorough and objective process where you're looking at the internal organization, the external market-facing look, you look at financial metrics of where you want to be, it's going to lead to an accelerated performance in the marketplace and hopefully true differentiation in the marketplace. And I'll let Denise talk a little bit about sort of what the firm's experienced post-strategy and some of the metrics that they're tracking and some of the improvements they've seen as a result of all this work.
So one of the things that we did is we formed industry groups, and we listened to our clients in all of this lengthy process we went through. Our clients said, we know who you are, but we're really not that sure what you do. So especially in our Oregon market, where we're much more known in this market. So we said, wow, that's interesting, because we've been here for a really long time. And so we said, there are a few industries that we feel like we're very strong in, and we do very, very good work, and we have very talented people. Why is it that we're not as known for these? And so we realized that part of that was just how we communicate and message to clients and potential clients in the community at large. So we decided that we would focus, we would look internally at the industries where we had a lot of strength, and also the industries that were doing well in our geographical area, and ones that we felt like we could grow. And so we set up 6 different industries. And again, with that criteria, ones that we had deep bench strength and that we felt like the market could actually sustain and grow in those industries. And we assigned industry group leaders in each of those 6 industries. So we really focused on becoming experts. And for the first year, 2 years, really for the first couple of years, we asked our attorneys and other professionals within our firm to really become experts in those 6 industries. And so we did a lot of different things in order to make that happen. Because our clients, some of the feedback we got from our clients was they said also that they want us to become the firm that can help them see around corners. So not just addressing an issue as it comes up, but also thinking about them and thinking about their industry and what's happening, so that we can give them advice for things that haven't happened yet that may be on the horizon for them. Next.
Yeah, let me just make a point from my perspective. What I saw Schwabe doing very well is they realized that first year of going to an industry focus and just 6 industries, which wasn't easy. I mean, it was hard to get down to those 6 because typically a partner would say, well, what about this industry? What are that, another one? We'll address how we sort of dealt with those industries that didn't fit within those categories. But, there was a fair amount of education process sort of say, okay, now that we've got these industry groups, how do we become experts in it? How do we educate the other lawyers? And, that first year was really sort of an internal learning, and allow them then to, in the second, third year, to kind of start focusing out into the marketplace. So one of the recommendations we make for firms that are moving down this path is, sometimes the person that's leading that industry group for the first year or so is going to be more of a internal champion and educator and helping kind of rally troops around the industry. If you then switch to more of a market-facing process after that, when you go to market, sometimes that initial leader isn't the right one for that industry group. You might then need someone that's a little bit more focused on business development and marketing, and sort of the, getting that word out to the marketplace.
This is where I jump in. This is Berkey. I have to concur with Denise and Doug. It was really a serendipitous team, and hats off to Schwabe for assembling it. We really did have a challenge ahead of us. This is the logo that we walked into, and it's interesting. There are any number of well, first of all, you could see yourself that this is a logo that's somewhat from the past. I'll try to unpack some of these things from a design point of view for you all. These caps, initial caps and small caps, was classic law firm letterhead for 175 years, and it was only slowly that people changed around. I think the last ones that made that change in the large firms, the American Lawyer 100, the very largest firms, was around 2001, 2002, so it's not actually all that old. When we had gone through the process, however, the logo was not on the table. That was not part of what we were looking to do, but it was our feeling that we simply had to do this, or the other materials wouldn't take shape properly without it. So when we created the new logo, we tried to stay somewhat true to the fonts. That is to say, we used a classic font here, and it's a serif font on the top, but we made it upper and lowercase, and we put the emphasis right where their street name was on Schwabe. So it's the full name, of course, is Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt, but that's not what they were known as around the firm. And we know from our own research that people will remember 2 or 3 syllables, not 2 or 3 words, but 2 or 3 syllables, and therefore you had in the very first name an ideal length of the name here. There was also some confusion with the financial services firm Schwabe, or Schwab, sorry, and that was, we were trying both in color and style to keep ourselves at arm's length between that, but it's the overall look and feel of the brand that's really going to achieve that. So we follow certain rules in our shop that seem obvious when you see them up here like this: design around business goals. Of course, what else would you design around? But if you put your own materials through these filters, I think that you might find them that you haven't succeeded as well as you thought you had, because the business goal of any communications piece ought to be crystal clear. The position and brand of the firm ought to be crystal clear with that. It may mean that you have to sit and look at it for a second to understand it, but a really good brand does its work almost immediately. We want everyone to position themselves as important, confident, and a leader, which is another no-brainer. Who wants to be unimportant, lacking in confidence, and a follower, Mr. Invisible? No one. But if you look once again at your materials and ask yourself, are we doing that? Have we achieved that? Do we look the part that we really feel that we are in terms of the service that we deliver? Then there's another thing that there are only, I think, 3 or 4 rules here. What's important from a marketing point of view, and it can be said that this is the entire goal of business to business services intangible marketing, is to preview what it's like to work with you. In order to do that, you need to encourage dialogue, humanize your offering, and then tell stories and deliver proof. So many, just go to almost any law firm website, and you'll see them making a grandiose claim about the firm or about their service style, but yet offering no proof for it at all. And those claims are, coming from the seller, inherently incredible. Using charts, maps, tables, and diagrams to deliver substantive content is critical to us. We really have no readers. We only have scanners. You have to earn someone's attention, and you earn it in short bursts, whether it's a headline, an image, a picture, a map, whatever it is. All of those things are critical tools to help engage the reader and then continue their engagement. So here's where we started. Now, the final rule that we got in our shop that we push everything we do through is quick. You've got 3 seconds. What's your takeaway? Well, we've got some great looking guys. And by the way, they are wonderful people. These are the former managing partners. But there's nothing that I can tell about Schwabe. In fact, it's a reading experience pretty much. And I don't have a sense that I'm wearing the kind of suit that I'd really want to wear in this contemporary world. If you go inside and look at the pages on the inside, it feels a bit the same way. By the way, this is so typical of not just law firms, but accounting firms, consulting firms, and everywhere along the line. I spend an enormous amount of time writing articles, throwing events, etc. And yet I look at this and I don't have what we believe is necessary is a curated presentation of the firm's thought leadership. So these are our starting points here. And then finally, the same thing, you get to the practice area descriptions, which continue to be the same, even though sites launch with new bottles, they pour old wine into those new bottles, and the net effect is the same. It may feel prettier or somewhat more contemporary, but there's no real marketing going on here that's helping the firm achieve its goals. So here, I think I can play this, and I just want to give you some sense. This is the home page, and I'll unpack it just a little bit. The 6 industries that are on the home page here: transportation, ports and maritime, natural resources, real estate and construction, technology, manufacturing, distribution, retail, and healthcare. And we cycle through some slight movement on the page, but we're then presenting on the right-hand side this concept of leading technology companies are represented by Schwabe. And we're going to talk a little more about the represented by Schwabe, but you see it showing up here on the lower left beside the shoes, embossed, embedded into what we call hero images for the firm. So if we just, I think I can click forward and you'll get to see how this works. If I further unpack the longer page, because it's a long scrolling page, you'll see that thought leadership immediately takes over under the rubric on the left-hand side that's held vertically, ideas fuel industries.
Yeah, and Berkey, let me just jump in and say one thing. What I found really fascinating about this process is it's oftentimes hard when you're the strategy consultant and taking a written document and saying, okay, here's our strategy, and presenting that. This strategy was unveiled at Camp Schwabe, which is the partner retreat for the firm, which is actually a very fun event and very casual. But what was really fascinating about it is, I could have gotten up there and walked through, bullet points of the strategy, but Berkey does such a good job. And when he was able to visually show the partners that this is what it's going to start looking like, I think the light bulb went on. I think it's the old adage that, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I just think the collaboration, it just made my job so much easier to help convince and sort of show the partners, this is where we're going, this is why, and this is what it's going to look like, to get that buy-in. And I just think that made this whole process much more successful and facilitated it dramatically for all of us involved.
I agree with you, Doug. It's a bit of a dream team in that regard, but with the client in particular, because that's, you don't automatically get that kind of cooperation in a presentation like this. And this is a radical reshaping of the firm, and we've already actually gotten a couple of questions about this, but we'll talk to those as we move through this presentation. So this is the thought, the industry sector here, and the 6 industries were presented this way, the major industries. And when you get to a page, the environmental, for example, regulation and litigation practice description, they've got more energy than they've had before. I'm sorry, that white block should say represented by Schwabe screened into the leaf itself, and I guess that the next ones that show up will be the same way as a white block. My bad. When you get to the insights or thought leadership section, we are urging our clients to collect everything together, so you do not have a separate page for alerts or press releases or articles or books or whatever it is, or events. You put them all together in a thought leadership section that looks more like the Harvard Business Review online. We are so devoted to industries here that we've given them the thought leadership meaning by having it say ideas fuel industries. You can expect to find ideas here. So it's curated with the editor's choice that's on the left, and then down you'll find other thought leadership elements that show up on the site. There's another one of those white blocks, but here you're going to About Schwabe, and you'll see you've got a description there, but you've got some fast facts on the right-hand side. But the whole presentation is dramatically more colorful, more energetic, and just more Schwabe, because this is who these people really are. I think it reflects them pretty well. Biographies are treated the same way, in a much more lively way. We're finding that not just law firms, but everybody has finally gotten around to the idea that a high school headshot does not cut it, and that I really, in order to get to know someone, that is to remove the arm's length distance between buyer and seller, that I need to present that individual so I get more visual information. That's what we're doing here. Also, they've got, you see that Alicia has a quote that goes further to that preview idea. I like to think of myself as a problem solver for my clients. Therefore, I must, above all things, listen. I already want to know more about Alicia as a result of this kind of presentation. So every touch point, every communication was brought into the brand, including this ad, and ads among many of the ads that were done that reflected some of the core brand imagery. Not all of the work that we did reflected the core brand imagery that you saw on the on the homepage, the healthcare, the shoe for the sportswear and the like. But law firms in particular have so little time and opportunity to make an impression on clients that we have to repeat and repeat and repeat and make sure that we're telling the same story the same way again and again. It's not as if I could put a Coke in your hand and bring the brand to life that way. And it's not even as if I'm Accenture, for example, who spent $125 million just to seat their name in the minds of business people. We have to work a lot harder with a substantially smaller budget. So everything is touched, as I mentioned. The PowerPoint presentations were recreated so that, and we tried to give guidelines so they weren't what we call a slaughterhouse of words. Many different ways to tell the same story here in different slide views. So people had options they could feel comfortable with in using these presentations. You introduce the team this way. And of course, you could talk about, introduce ideas of graphics, but they all have a Schwabe look and feel, consistently told. We also put together a brand story. And we found ourselves doing this a lot more. It's not just the single page document that you might hand to a printer to tell them how to use your logo. This is a document for lawyers, for staff, and for laterals, for everyone on the team to know, what are we talking about? What did we mean? So the brand promise was Schwabe is focused on your industry, a member of your team committed to deliver excellence and expertise and ideas, recognizing that every deal has a dream and every risk an opportunity. That's what it means to be represented by Schwabe. So that with that introduction, we went further into why we changed the brand, what do clients gain by working with us? In other words, helping you with your 30-second pitch about what's good about, what can you tell someone immediately about what's great about Schwabe. We obviously addressed the core graphical elements of the brand. And then we talked about this seal represented by Schwabe. and how to use it, because and by the way, I've just heard recently the idea is really gaining traction. But our goal was to make this a kind of JD Power seal of approval. If you were represented by Schwabe, then you were represented by the very best. And some might feel it's going out on a limb, but I don't think so. I think it's what people want. Our research shows that people want to be proud of the people that they're working with.
Hey, and Berkey,
yep.
I'll insert something right there. We've also taken that one step further. Clients are represented by Schwabe, but internally we've created a campaign called Representing Schwabe.
Yes.
And so we've actually have these clear seals that say Representing Schwabe. And when someone has a big win or does something really great for a client, they show up to work and they've got a big seal on their door. And everyone knows that that person has just done something. We follow it up with an internal email talking about what that person did and what they've accomplished for the client. So that has two separate meanings for us, both external and internal.
And that's so cool. You know, the brand can just be something that sits on a website or in a drawer, but it's not going to work. It's got to come alive in the hearts and minds of the users. And that's, I think, what made this such an exciting adventure in the change, because it was a dramatic change. It demanded buy-in, but it also excited people, and they still seem to be excited about it. Well, we put everything together and all of the tools that be available for a lateral or recruit to know that if you were going to move to Schwabe, that you actually had a terrific platform for building your own practice. And we know, of course, that's important to everyone. I'm going to, this is the back page, more on Idealsville Industries. The next step in this occurred about 6 to 9 months later, where with Lindsay McReynolds, who's the CMO at Schwabe, she interviewed 7 groups around the Pacific Northwest, because what we wanted to do was insert Schwabe into the conversation about innovation in the Pacific Northwest. So this was the book that I wrote, and it's a book, really. I mean, I really like a magazine, but it's substantial. It's not small. And it had profiles of each of these clients: Pacific Seafood, Big ML, Vigor, and others. And then you go inside, you see who the people are. Here are our former managing partners, and you get a glimpse of Gabrielle on the left, who's the new managing partner. But as you walked in, you saw you got these stories. So how often do you get really an interview or a publication like this, which takes it up to the max from the design point of view? The goal was to provide something that the firm could be proud of, but so could those individuals who were profiled within the book itself. So it's Northwest Timber, we've got Columbia Sportswear, we've got Big ML, machine learning to the masses, and then you've got here on the at the back is Gabrielle, and that was announcing her. We use this also as an opportunity to announce her ascension to the role as managing partner at Schwabe. So you can see, I think, how all of these things hang together, but that we're building the entire brand around industry and then continuing to devote serious resources into creating new materials that expand on and continue the excitement.
And let me go back to the previous slide for a second. Berkey, I just have to tease you for a minute because you keep calling Graciela Gabriella.
I'm sorry, I'm not.
You're not the only one. It's pretty funny. Anyway, so Graciela Calgar is our CEO, and I just wanted to highlight for a second the title, because we went from having a president and a managing partner to having a CEO, and that was very intentional on our part. So it isn't just a name change. It really is a change in focus. So to give you an example, our co-managing partners before, Dave and Mark, still practiced 50% of the time, and then 50% was in their duties leading the firm. Mark Long was a little bit more external focused, client and client relations. And then Dave was more internal focused on operations, including comp committee work. When we made these changes and worked through this process, again, going back to what I said earlier, we talked about who are we trying to become? And one of the things that we decided was that we needed a full-time CEO, someone who, when they woke up every morning, they were solely focused on helping us achieve the goals in our strategic plan. Obviously, I partner strongly with this person, and Graciela and I together form the firm's executive committee. But that was, I just wanted to pause there and just talk about the intentionality of the position, and it's not just a language change.
What makes that gaffe even worse was that Graciela was a client of ours in 1998, which was a leader in a small IP firm in Portland as well. So bad me. So who's got this?
Yeah, I think it's just sort of a summary of kind of what they put together. You know, and I think what we'd like to do in the next couple of slides is, you know, it's always interesting as a consultant to push a client pretty hard to adopt some radical changes, you know, and we kept saying, trust us, this is going to work. And then we're thinking, oh, we do hope it works. But, you know, one of the things that we did push Schwabe on was really, what are the metrics you guys want to measure as a result of the strategy? And given the fact that the revenue had been flat for about 10 years, we said that, to me as a consultant, that's the #1 metric. Let's put some ambitious goals around where the firm wants to grow in the next 3 to 5 years. And I think, you know, it'd be interesting to hear Denise's perspective on what you guys have achieved in terms of sort of metrics and results. But I think it's also important for Denise to talk a little bit about, you know, this process isn't easy. It's a multi-year process, but you have to sort of stick with it and get people through that initial phase where you're asking them to do things differently. You're asking certain partners to say, you know, your industry group doesn't necessarily fit the firm, but we still think you're very important. And how do you manage some of those things? So Denise, maybe you could just talk a little bit about, you know, results so far over the last couple of years. You know, how has the firm done? You know, what you guys have seen?
Sure, and I think if you go forward, there's a slide that captures some of that.
Yep.
Yeah, so here are some of the successes that we have realized, and some of this data is actually a little bit old now because this was really at the end of last year. So we have seen a revenue growth in Seattle by about 14% since our strategic plan launch. Our revenue per lawyer has grown by 8.6%. We have hired 60 laterals since we launched our plan in 2015. We've retained 80% of those. Now, to me, that's a big statistic. Because I know that the retention rate on lateral hires tends to be pretty low. And so we're very proud of the statistic and all the things we're doing to, you know, hire the right people and then, you know, keep them here and keep them busy and happy. We have expanded our client base. You'll notice on when Berkey was showing our old website, there was no mention of a California office and no mention of an office in Alaska. So in the last few months, we have opened an office in Anchorage, where we have a maritime practice and an opportunity to bring on some new maritime lawyers, and that's a strong practice area for us. And they picked us because they liked what they were seeing in terms of that being one of our focused industries. So they actually came to us and asked to have a conversation about joining us. And then we also, Long Beach is on here. We actually did not open an office in Long Beach, but we got pretty far down the road in that conversation. But we did significantly expand. We had a one-person office in Mountain View, California, and we have since significantly expanded our presence in Mountain View, and our presence there goes beyond technology, which was the original reason why we were in Mountain View. So those are some of the things that, I mean, those are just really specific targets that we set our sights on, and we have been able to grow. Like Doug said, our revenue was pretty flat for many years. I will tell you that we set a target for revenue growth that we thought was pretty aggressive, and we hit our target 2 years early. So I think it's fascinating that what you focus on, you can achieve. And in our case, that has definitely been true. Doug also mentioned that this doesn't happen overnight, and that there are lots of steps. I mean, it was super fun when we launched our new strategic plan and our new rebrand, and had Doug and Berkey there for the excitement and the rollout, and we had industry-related prizes for people, so that, creating a lot of fun and a lot of energy around our retreat. And so that was great. And then the work began. So it was a lot of work getting up to that point. And then on the operations side, it has been a lot of investment of energy and reinvestment of energy over time to say, here's where we are now. And so we initially said we were in strategic plan 1.0. Last year, we felt like we were in 2.0, and now we're talking about 3.0. And those really just correspond to how many years in we are. I like to think of it in terms of developmental stages. So making sure that you have some key foundational pieces in place so that you can go from year 1 to 2 and from year 2 to 3, similar to, to thinking of it as, child growth and development. You cannot run before you walk. So part of my challenge as COO in this process has been making sure on the operations side that everything is aligned and helping us to achieve the goals in our plan. And that has presented some real challenges at times. And we've just had to be open and move through some of those challenges that have come up.
We've got a ton of questions, actually, that I'd like to get through. But let me start with some that we got here on the line. The first one, and this is one that I would have myself, actually. Did everybody see themselves in this new industry model? Surely some complained.
Well, we definitely had some people who said, I don't see myself in this. The work I do isn't one of these 6 industries. By and large, 95% of our lawyers did sign up, and we asked them to declare a major and a minor. So we wanted them to be involved in 2 different industries. 95% of the folks selected at least a major. Most selected a major and a minor. There were still a handful of people who just said, I don't believe in this. I don't think this is what we're doing. And so we made the decision that we would not be distracted by those who were the naysayers, that they could, in some cases, there were people who were really close to retirement and they didn't feel like reinventing themselves. But also, they had practices where we had a strong client base, but again, we just weren't going to focus on growing that particular practice. The 6 industries we picked were industries we felt like we had opportunity for growth and for learning more about those industries. We still maintained other practice areas that we had done for a while and we had good expertise in. We just didn't see those as our areas of growth. So
this one may be asked and answered already. How did you determine what indicia would indicate success? Did we have those metrics before, as we began, and just hope that we would hit them, or what was that?
Well, what we did is, and again, it's one of those where looking backwards, we might do it different if we had to do it over. We had some metrics. We set an overall firm revenue goal. We set some goals in terms of the number of lawyers and also some goals around where we wanted to be. But what we didn't do and didn't have the capacity to do at the time that we launched our strategic plan was we really didn't have the ability to run sophisticated reports out of our accounting system that showed things like, here's the industry, here's how much revenue we have by these 6 industries, so that we could then set target goals for those. We didn't even have our clients coded with the NCIS codes in our system. So we have had to then go back since we launched our strategic plan and actually put the industry codes in. So now we're able to run some of those reports that would have been really helpful to have from the very beginning.
I'll bet. how to keep everyone motivated? I mean, Doug has mentioned, we've all talked about this being a long haul. This question was specifically, how did you keep up the spirit and motivation of the troops?
It's a great question, and I think that part of it's with humor. So when we have experienced lulls, we put a tagline on it. I think Doug gave us a tagline that we could never remember, so we just changed it and we called it the Valley of Despair. And so we would talk to somebody and say, "You're just in the Valley of Despair. That's all it is. You'll get through it. It's just a valley." So we would do that in meetings, and we would do that individually. I think thinking of it in terms of strategic plan 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 has also helped people to understand, again, it's a developmental phase. This is where we are now. It's not always going to be this way. But then along the way, too, we've just continued to give people access to new learning and to new tools. We've just finished 2 classes where we put people through a very intensive business development training that was a training that was made for professionals like lawyers, and it was a very intensive class, several weeks long. They learned like over 200 different tools on how to be better at business development. So we've had like 38 lawyers go through that, and that has been a huge boost. In fact, it's created a new language, and so I've had people try to use this language on me to actually get firm resources. It's been kind of a funny thing, but we've just continued to try new things. We've had some turnover in our industry group leaders. Again, going back to what Doug mentioned, which is the people that you start with are not necessarily, and the people who get something off the ground are not necessarily 3 years in, the people who still need to be in that leadership role, because maybe you need a different kind of leader. That's happened. And we've had about half of our industry group leaders have turned over now. The other thing that we did is that we recognized that we had a lot of people in a lot of leadership roles, and we had probably too many people who we were taking away from the practice of law. So we reorganized. And we have reorganized ourselves. We had a practice group structure as well as our industry groups. And so we have removed the practice groups completely. We had 9 of them. And instead, we have put everybody into one of 4 departments, and we have a department head. And so those are really just our kind of our operational functions. And we did that, again, so that we can emphasize that the industry group leader focus and go-to-market strategies is what we're about, and that's what we're supporting. Other things are important, like doing good client intake. That's important, and making sure things are staffed well. But we really are serious about our industry focus.
Let me just say from my perspective, what you guys have done very well is I've seen this with a lot of firms where they set a pretty clear strategy, and then a partner comes, or an important partner comes and says, well, this doesn't fit, your strategy doesn't fit my practice. And oftentimes, the firm will acquiesce and say, okay, well, we'll make an exception. And then they do it again and again. And pretty soon, the strategy that was pretty clear becomes diffused, and it doesn't really mean anything, and you drift back into that. You guys were pretty firm about, no, these are the 6 industries. And, if you don't fit within one of those industries and aren't willing to take on that major or minor, you did work with those partners, and you helped them understand how clients would perceive this, and how to help those clients that didn't fit in those industry groups still feel important and respected, as clients of the firm. But you didn't sort of, give in pretty quickly. You stuck to your guns, so to speak.
We did, and it's hard to do. I will say that there have been a lot of tough conversations, and that's one of the things you need to look for in a leader, is you need to look for somebody who's willing to have that tough conversation, and somebody who can do that well, because you don't want somebody feeling devalued. And that was never our intention, is to make somebody feel that they weren't important anymore. But most of our lawyers could learn more about an industry, and they could become more valuable to clients who work in that industry. We have very few exceptions to that. And so we just continue to work with that person who did put up the resistance and did say, you don't value me anymore, and said, no, let us show you what's possible. And the other thing that I think we've done a pretty good job at is highlighting our successes internally. So we routinely communicate with people about requests for proposals that we got because of being industry focused, proposals that we've won because of our industry focus, lateral hires that we have been able to bring in. We brought in some pretty big whales recently in the last year because of being industry focused. So we tried our best to communicate that back so that people see the value of having made this decision to be industry focused. And our clients warned us in the beginning, don't just make this a marketing thing, because if it is, you'll fail. And so we're constantly reminding ourselves of that. This is not just a marketing thing.
So actually that brings me to another question is directly, what do clients think of all this, and what about the market in general?
Well, it's interesting because our clients love it, especially the clients that are in one of those 6 industries. They think it's fantastic. But we were a little bit concerned about some of our clients that don't neatly fit into one of those industries, whether or not they would feel like they're no longer relevant to us. And that really didn't happen. We were worried about it, and we had made sure that our key lawyers working with some of those clients had conversations with them. But we heard over and over from all of our clients that they thought that what we were doing was quite candidly brilliant. So we've had very positive feedback from our communities.
Well, we'll take credit for that then.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, because one thing we talked a lot about in the strategy process was, we have to have focus in the marketplace. You've got to have metrics that show whether you're making progress or not, and we just kept tying that back to financial metrics, which were pretty clear. We also, talked a lot about patience. This is not going to happen overnight. You're not going to roll out this strategy and this rebranding and within weeks see results. And then you have to provide support to the lawyers to kind of go through the valley of despair. And to Schwabe's credit, they've done every one of these things. And you kind of hold your breath and hope that within 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, you start seeing those metrics, financial metrics, proving out that this has worked, which in this case has. That reinforces, okay, we're moving down the right direction. It keeps everybody focused and calm. And then it just begins to build more and more momentum over time. But it's not an overnight thing, and that just takes a lot of leadership and courage and willingness to stick to the plan and trust it's going to work out.
I think
go ahead.
Passion, perseverance, grit. These are some words that are widely known words now today, and I think those things are very relevant to what it is we're doing. We just don't give up. And I cannot emphasize enough the role that humor plays and the role that fun plays in this. We are a highly social firm. We're very democratic. We like to spend time with one another. And so we use that to our advantage to make sure that we're communicating as much as we can, encouraging, but also we just use a lot of these difficult moments as learning opportunities and helping someone to build their resilience. And so the other day I had a shareholder say to me, Denise, it's a whole bunch of things, isn't it? It's culture, and it's growth, and it's strategy, and it's financial acumen. And he's like, it's really amazing. It's like all of these things, like all of those things are important. And I'm like, they all are, and you have to focus on all of them at the same time.
So here's an interesting question here that it tells us something about our audience that's on the line. It says your firm is about 200 lawyers. Can you imagine pulling this off in a much larger firm, say with 500 or 1,000 lawyers? I know I'd like to chime in on that, but Doug, Denise?
I'll let you guys chime in on that.
Berkey, since you raised your hand first, I'm going to let you go ahead.
For me, I find that, first of all, to Denise's point, maybe those larger firms aren't that much fun. And that could be a problem because this firm really does have this social culture, really gregarious firm that's fun-loving is probably wrong, but it's probably right too, hardworking, fun-loving. I've found that from a technical point of view, you don't need size doesn't matter. In other words, all of the research that we did in advance of this, all of the effort that we put into, and you all put into set up the structure and the like, that's a framework that can carry 500 or 1,000 lawyers. That's not the problem. The problem is that you really do need very strong leadership, and that you need to understand that if Schwabe had 1, 2, 5, 10 people that weren't so interested, that a larger firm is going to have 20, 50, 100 people that are not interested in that. But it is the overall challenge, the structure, the bottom line expense, etc., is no more. The challenge of keeping it going would probably be multiplied by the number of lawyers, because you're simply going to need more brand ambassadors walking the halls, keeping everybody excited about what's going on. And that happens, would particularly true if you had lots and lots of offices that are all far-flung.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good analysis, Berkey, because I think you're right. Mechanics and the structure and the process is very similar, and the cost is similar. But you think about Schwabe, 200 lawyers. You had 3 or 4 very motivated, passionate leaders that were willing to take on that strong leadership role, who could walk the halls and talk to everybody. If a larger firm doesn't have 20 partners in leadership that are really willing to take that mantle on and really be those ambassadors and push this forward, it just gets harder to move a bigger ship like that. It can be done. We've seen it done, but it just takes that amount of leadership multiplied.
Yeah. That's it. That's all the questions that came in. I think any last words, either of you?
One of the things I will say is we had this question a lot as we were getting started, which is, how do I get everybody on board? And so one of our responses to that is start with the coalition of the willing. There are people who are going to be early adopters. They're going to think this is great because they think everything's great. Go with them, get your energy from them, and then go to work on those middle people who are sitting on the fence and they're sort of waiting to see if this is going to work or not. And then those people who are just going to hold out, don't waste your time on them. Just don't focus on them. We'll take care of them in other ways and in other processes. But what we have told our leaders is focus on the coalition of the willing and gain your energy and momentum from that, because it is amazing. At some point, you do reach a tipping point where this is just what you're doing and this is just who you are now. But you do have to just keep pushing and pushing to get there. And if you stay committed to it and you don't give up, it will happen.
Well, great. I just want to thank everyone. We appreciate you being here. The webinar will be on all 3 of our websites, both Greenfield Belser, Schwabe, and Catapult. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.